Hello, this is Jim McKeith, and welcome to day 2 of the RAD Mobile Boot Camp, Platform Specifics for iOS and Android. Hopefully you were with us yesterday and you got my full spiel for my bio, but if you're still curious, there it is for you. Yesterday we talked about FireMonkey, the Fire UI, and platform services. Tomorrow we're talking about creating and consuming REST services and service-oriented architectures. Today we're talking about platform specifics for iOS and Android. Based on some of the feedback I got yesterday, I'm actually added this first section here on layouts and development in general, just because there are some had some confusion around that. But I'm still going to go and cover the rest of the stuff, which is going to start. Then we're going to go into some of the common FireMonkey platform access components for camera, sensors, etc. FireMonkey framework architecture, as far as how the framework is architected. And then jump into the Android JNI Bridge, including how to import your own Android APIs and bundling third-party Java jar files into your application. Then we'll talk about the iOS Objective-C bridge and how to import iOS APIs. In VCL, at least I always did, use T-panels to lay things out on my form. On FireMonkey, you're going to use the T layout, and there's actually a number of different T layouts available to you. One of them is the layout 3D. That one's you use if you're actually planning to put a 3D viewport down where you're going to rotate something in 3D. I guess I have done some 3D, but generally in a regular 2D application, you're not going to use that one. But there's a number of other layouts you can choose from. There's a skill sprint on FireMonkey layouts I did a while back that goes into all the different layouts as well as the different alignment options and stuff that are available on FireMonkey. Way more options than you had available in VCL. So if you're new to FireMonkey, definitely check that one out so that you can see some of the different options available to you. There's a tutorial in the doc wiki on using FireMonkey layouts, and also a great document on FireMonkey layout strategies that talks about some of the different things you can accomplish with FireMonkey layouts. And then finally, there's a guide on arranging FireMonkey controls available in the doc wiki. Something that was discussed yesterday in one of the Q&A sessions was that you can use tab controls to create different pages of controls, as opposed to using different forms. Now, in mobile apps, your form is always full screen. So if you have a tab control down and the tab control is full screen, you can put different collections of different collections of components on each tab control, and that can be like the user's moving through different screens. The advantage there being is that you're able to access all your code. The disadvantage being everything's all in one spot. So if you want to read more information on using tab controls to display pages, you can check out there. You can also use frames to encapsulate layouts. And so, for example, you could have a tab control full screen with the tab position set to hidden, and then each tab having a different frame on it. And so that would have the advantage of not having all of the code for each tab in the same unit. It would be in the frames unit. So that could be a definite plus if you have something rather complex, but you're wanting to use tab controls. So there's information working with frames. And then also a while back, we had a Code Rage 8. Robert Love did a VCL developer's guide to FireMonkey. So you can check that out there, the replay on YouTube, and learn some more about some of the ins and outs of FireMonkey. He talks about what the differences are and some of the things you need to know if you're coming to FireMonkey new from VCL. So let's do a little demo here on layouts and FireMonkey development. A few people commented that there wasn't any good resources that explained how to do development with multiple forms. I'm not sure exactly what it was they're trying to get to, but I thought I'd go ahead and put that in here and show how to do multiple forms. I have 2 forms here, form 1, and there's form 1, and let's click here. Form 2. I'll put them both in iOS mode. They're not actually numbered Form 1 and Form 2, but I just labeled them as Form 1 and Form 2. Form 1 has a button that says Open. The Open button calls Form 38 Show and then Form 2 has a close button, and it calls close. I'll go ahead and run this on Windows, just so you can see the different behavior here. Open, close. Now, on Windows, you can also close here, but on iOS and Android, that's not going to be an option. Also, these are overlay differently. On iOS, not going to happen that way. So let's go ahead and run it on iOS, and you can see what it looks like. This is Form 1, and when I tap on the button, Form 2 appears, taking up the full screen, and there's the close button. So there you go. That's how you would do multiple forms. This is a really simple sample showing using tab controls to have multiple pages. So I have a tab control down here, and I have 3 tab items, although I'm never actually using the third one in this demo. To add a tab item, you right click and say add tab item. And I've taken the tab control and gone down here to tab position and set it to none. Now, when it's set to none, you can see at design time these 3 little dots here. There is an option of dots that does show the dots at runtime, but at none, it shows the dots at design time but not runtime. So I can move between the tabs to edit the different pages, or I can, I guess that doesn't do it. I want to go to the tab control and active tab here. I can change to a different tab to configure it this way as well. Now, I've done this 2 different ways here. The button 1, I go tab index +1, and then button 2, I say tab or active tab equals tab 1. So I'll show this real quick on Windows. This behaves exactly the same as Windows it does on iOS or Android. So there we go. We just moved back and forth between 2 tabs. I've already got running here on iPhone Simulator, and just like that. So this is a great way, if you want to have different screens, you can have them set out like that. There's a sample, though. Open project. Samples. Object Pascal. Multi-device samples. User interfaces. Tab slide transition. So this one uses the tab slide transitions. I'm going to go ahead and run that here on Windows first. And then we'll run it on the simulator as well. So, and then when I hit next, see how it slides across and back? And so you can put logic in there so it doesn't let you slide if you don't fill it out, which I think is what this has. So if I don't put that in there, then see the next button is disabled. I can't tap on it. And now it's enabled. Okay, and so I can't go to the next one. So let's look at this real quick on simulator. You know, I never use the simulator except for when I'm doing presentations. Otherwise, I just prefer to have it on the device. It really even just develop it on the simulator. Until you run it on a device, you don't know. So here it is here. The next button is disabled. But I can type my name, Jim. And now the next button is enabled, and I can go next. And so it has a nice sliding transition there. So there you go. That's using the tab control. And this is using actions here. So the action list, you probably used actions before in VCL. Tab, next tab action. And there is a tab control. Where's it? Right there, transitions slide. So there's slide none. We have a webinar coming up in a couple weeks. Ray Knupp's going to show you how to extend this and add additional transitions in here. So if you're interested in that, certainly join us for that webinar. One of the things I've always loved about the VCL was that you could use the VCL and not really have to think about Windows messages and Windows handles and all the other stuff. And if you've ever had to program with the Windows API directly, you know they can be kind of a pain. So that's the great thing about VCL. You don't have to mess with the mess that is the API if you don't want to. But every now and then, you do need to reach down and touch the metal, I always say. Go down to the low level. And so the great thing about the VCL is you could get Windows handles. You could deal with Windows messages, and you could call into the Windows API. And the same is true for FireMonkey. When you're working with FireMonkey, you don't have to think about the differences of FireMonkey or of Android versus iOS, or the APIs for Android versus iOS, or the idiosyncrasies of Objective-C versus Java. All you do is work in either Delphi, Object Pascal, or C++ builder, and use the FireMonkey framework and the RTL, and you get your application built. 99%, maybe all of your app can be done at the FireMonkey RTL layer. But every now and then you got to reach down and grab those APIs directly, and that's totally possible with FireMonkey. So when you're working at the FireMonkey RTL layer, there's a number of components and libraries available for common hardware and sensors. For example, the T-camera component you can use to access the camera. Really, really easy. I've looked at some of the samples that are available for other frameworks or the different platform native APIs, and it's a real pain to work with the camera. With the T-camera component, it's really, really easy to grab and take pictures with the camera, and it works across iOS and Android as well as Windows and Mac OS. So very, very flexible, very powerful. All of these components, actually I believe almost all these components work on the desktop as well as the mobile devices. So for example, the location sensor, a lot of people say, I want to access the GPS. Well, the location sensor is probably what you're thinking of, but the location sensor is what we call a logical sensor, whereas the GPS is what we call a physical sensor. So a physical sensor is the actual chip in the phone or device that does the GPS functionality, for example. But a logical sensor is something that takes a collection or aggregate of a number of different sensor inputs. So it could be maybe the last time the GPS was active, because the GPS isn't active all the time because it uses a lot of battery to do that. And so maybe you go on and it just says, oh, well, the last time the GPS was on, this is where it says you were, and it wasn't that long ago, so it's probably where you're at. And so you can get a bit of information there. It can also use Wi-Fi triangulation. It can use Bluetooth triangulation, and a whole lot of other things in order to figure out your location. So the location sensor isn't always pulling GPS, but it will eventually pull the GPS. That also means it can work on different platforms. Maybe it doesn't have a GPS, for example, on your laptop. If your laptop doesn't have a GPS, location sensor still work because it can work off of Wi-Fi triangulation. So this is one of those things where you don't need to be aware of the implementation details, but you do need to be aware of how it works as far as controlling the accuracy. That's the way on all the different platforms. You usually don't talk straight to the GPS. You talk to the service on iOS or the service on Android that provides you location information. And you can do like a request for coarse versus fine location, for example, and that would determine whether or not it fires up the GPS or keeps the GPS on. Same thing with the motion sensor and orientation sensor, is they both are pulling aggregate information. So there's a gyroscope, there's an accelerometer, etc. The media player is what you use for playing media, video, and audio, and also for recording audio. T-Bluetooth and T-Bluetooth LE you use for talking to Bluetooth and Bluetooth LE devices. The difference between the two, Bluetooth is referred to as classic Bluetooth. It's prior to Bluetooth 4. It's the same kind of Bluetooth you use for your car, for example, to stream music to your car. It requires the pairing process, and it's longer range, but then has the advantage of it uses more power and can have larger bandwidth. Bluetooth LE doesn't require pairing, uses much less power. The LE is low energy, and transmits less data. So that's what you'd use like for a heart rate monitor, for example. T-beacon and T-beacon devices are for working with beacons. They're actually the opposite of each other. T-beacon is what you use to locate a beacon. A beacon is a little Bluetooth LED device that just transmits. And the idea is that you put the beacon in a fixed location and you can tell your proximity to that beacon. That's what the T-beacon component's for. T-beacon device, on the other hand, turns your phone into a beacon. And so you can have that, and another device can have a T-beacon component, and it can tell how far it is from a T-beacon device component device. I use the word device a lot in there, but hopefully you got what I mean there. Notification center is what you use for scheduling and displaying notifications to the user. You can even schedule them from the application's not running. So those, I think, are most of the components off the tool palette, but there's also some other services that are in the RTL layer. For example, there's the sensor manager that lets you enumerate all the various types of sensors. For example, most Android devices have a lot of sensors you can get access to, which is really kind of fun. iOS devices don't usually have as many sensors available to you. But anyway, those are all accessible at the high level. So you don't need to understand the differences to different platforms. You just need to understand how to work with the T-camera component or the sensor manager or whatever, because those provide an abstraction. But they also have custom interfaces that give you access to platform-specific features as necessary. So kind of like we talked about yesterday with platform services. There are quite a few samples here that ship with RAD Studio, Delphi, C++ Builder. I'll show you some of the Delphi ones here. The mobile snippets and multi-device samples are going to be the ones that are going to be focused on mobile development. So mobile snippets, we can come in here and look at the camera component one, for example, here. Also, you notice there's a README file in the folder here. Short Messenger, Short Explorer. There's a README file in each sample folder. And so you can open that up. And it's going to show you how it works. Have a little explanation of it here as well. So definitely check that out if you have questions on how to use any of these. But let's go ahead and run this. And I'm going to run it on Windows because it works on Windows, which is really cool that it just works on Windows. So let's see. Start camera. I said it works on Windows. Okay, it's because I'm in a virtual machine, I guess. Usually this works. All right. I'm in a virtual machine. I've had it work inside the virtual machine before. All right, if I ran it on Mac OS, it would work. Actually, I'll go ahead and do that. I might not have Mac OS set up. Let's see. Yep, I haven't imported the SDK yet. There you go. That's what importing the SDK looks like. It just takes a minute. So we'll go and run this on Mac. There we go. Hello. So I have multiple monitors. I have a monitor over here and a monitor over there. And it's not flipped. There's a command you can actually do to flip the screen. But actually, the fact that this isn't flipped is useful because I was doing presentations, and if you use any of the photo apps that are built in, they flip it. And when I'm showing like text that I want to make bigger for the presentation, I can't do that. But this one doesn't flip it, so that's useful. See, like my shirt says RAD Studio. But anyway, all right, that's enough looking at me. Lots of settings you can change here. You can change the resolution, the torch, the light, if the camera has it. On MacBook doesn't have that. You can specify what resolution you want to record in and frame rate and such is here as well. All that's in the code. Take a look at the code. Pretty straightforward. The only thing that's tricky here is on the on-sample buffer ready, there is a T-thread synchronize because this comes back in a different thread. Okay, so you got to synchronize it and to get image. So that's one thing. If you do this, if you don't do that, then you'll get some odd behavior. But and I run this on the. I don't know what's going to do on the simulator. I can't remember what the simulator does for. Like I said, I never use the simulator unless I'm doing a presentation. And even then, if I'm doing a live presentation, I just as soon do an actual device because people like to actually touch the device. Oops, I did device and I don't have a device hooked up. Oh, simulator's not there. That's why I missed it. Add platform. Why can't I add platform? Okay, that's fine. The camera component might not work in the simulator. That might be why. I may have taken it out. All right, so other samples in here. Sample project. Pascal. The multi-device samples. Here's where you can see the user interfaces. So this is all different user interfaces. There's the tab slide transition, shader filters. That's really cool stuff here. Copy paste, custom lister box. Lots of great samples in there. But as far as like accessing the different devices, different pieces of hardware, or different UI elements. So here's a gyroscope sample, orientation sensor sample. There's a share sheet. Share sheet is where you can use an action to take a photo and then share it to social media. Very cool. Video playback. I thought there was a video recording in here. Camera roll lets you pick from the camera roll. Oh, here we go. Audio, record, and playback. Accelerometer. So you can just come in here, any of these samples, and check them out, and it kind of shows you how to use the component in there, and you can go from there. Because I was doing an interesting project, I'm not really sure what happened to it, where I was using two camera components and taking a picture from the front and the back at the same time. Well, one right after the other. It worked out pretty good, actually. I was surprised how easy it was to do. But it's one of those things, I got the first 80% of the functionality done sitting at an airport, and then by the time I got home, I forgot about it and never finished the second 20%, which takes 80% of the time. Because anyway, let's talk about the Android JNI Bridge. Now, Android is based on Java, and actually it's their own implementation of Java they call Dalvik, and it uses the Java runtime. It's a totally different beast than native development. So when you're doing native development, it's operating a totally different way on the device. And so you have to have this JNI bridge. JNI is Java Native Interface. It's a bridge between your native Delphi and C++ code and the managed code that is in the Android Java framework. So all the APIs on Android are written in Java, and so you have to have this interface in order to get to those APIs. Google provides two different SDKs. They provide the NDK, which is the native development kit, and the Android SDK, which is the Java-based development kit. They are do different things around like pre-compiling applications and stuff like that for performance purposes, but still at the end of the day, the APIs are in the Java Dalvik runtime. So you have to have this bridge there to allow the interface between the two. The bridge is found in Android API.JNI Bridge, but there's a couple other units that are useful to have, which is the helpers and JNI Java types. With those three units, you're actually able to do quite a bit of interacting directly with the Java APIs from Delphi. So that's really, really powerful that you're able to have that level of functionality that supports like type interop, both classes and primitive types. There's a number of interfaces that you use to move between the two. There are 68 Android API units in the folder source/RTL/Android. So that's where all the ones that are imported for FireMonkey and the RTL are found. Now there's a lot of other APIs that aren't imported in there. And so sometimes you can just go in and grab those APIs directly and deal with them. But if your API is not in that folder, then you can import your own, which we'll talk about in just a second. So for more information on using internal Java libraries directly, there's a link to the doc wiki down there, a page that talks specifically about. Now, if you want to import your own Android APIs, which could be, for example, a API in the Android SDK that it just isn't already imported, or it could be from a third party, then you can use the Java2OP utility. It's a command line utility that creates object Pascal wrappers for Java jar libraries or Java source code. really kind of cool, fairly easy to use, I think. And you just point it at the Java jar file, give it the name of the unit you want to create, and it creates it for you. There's the documentation for it there, embt.co/java2op, and it will explain how to use it, and you can go from there. If you're wanting to just import some additional APIs from the Android framework, though, FMX Express has gone through and imported all of the Android APIs and put them up on GitHub. So there's the link there to GitHub. There's a lot there. So you're not going to just go there and download it all and say, there, I'm done. Well, you could, I guess. It's certainly an option. But it's big. There's a lot of data there. So most likely what you're going to do is say, okay, I'm wanting to access this API in this version of Android, and go and find that particular API and that particular file and download it from GitHub. Be aware, though, that some of the APIs do reference each other. So, for example, if you have one API, but the return type is defined in another class, then you have to get that class as well. If, on the other hand, though, you have a jar file provided by a third party, maybe it's a special jar file that provides special functionality or provides interface to a different, maybe a web service or another app on the device or special hardware or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's like a Samsung phone and Samsung has a special SDK for functionality on a Samsung device. No problem. You can use Java2op to point to that and then bundle the jar file if necessary. So if it's a jar file that's not built into the phone already, you can bundle that into your application. There's a link there. Custom Java library shows you how to bundle in that jar file into your application. It's actually pretty easy to do. There's actually quite a bit of flexibility you can have in the modifying the behavior in that Java bundle that is included with your application. So if you're not aware of it, the way in your application you build with Delphi or C++ Builder, they're required by the OS to have a header that's in Java, and then there's a number of libraries that are also bundled with your application. That's why everybody's like, oh my goodness, the application is so big. Well, it's because it's got Google Play services, it's got the compatibility pack, it's got a number of other Java jar files that any application of any consequence has all these bundled in it to begin with. But yes, a hello world that you create with Android Studio doesn't have those because you don't need them. But if you do anything else, well, you're going to start importing those jar files. Those are already built in Delphi. So there's quite a bit of flexibility in customizing that, and there's some information there on how to do that. Now, if you're interested in a book on the subject, the Delphi Cookbook Second Edition does have a section that talks about how to do all of this there. So I have the first edition, I haven't bought the second edition. It's all new content in there, so I probably should just go out and buy it, but I haven't done it yet. It's by Daniel Tate. Lots of great information. Packet Publishing. It just came out last year, a year ago, so maybe he's working on a third edition now. I don't know. Packet's really excited about Delphi. They've got a number of books published about Delphi, and they've got number of other ones they're working on getting published in the near future. Now let's talk about the iOS Objective-C bridge. Objective-C has a runtime, but it is native code, and so it doesn't have the same level of indirection that's required with the Java JNI bridge. In fact, with Objective-C, when you're working with the Objective-C bridge, accessing other frameworks is a lot like you would do a DLLs on Windows. It's the same syntax, whereas the Java JNI is a fairly different syntax. That being said, there is a bridge, though, that you need to use, and that's found in Mac API Objective-C. So you notice that says Mac API, and that's because both Mac OS and iOS, technically iOS is based on the same foundation as Mac OS, and so there's a lot of shared behavior and code between the two, and that's the same is true for the FireMonkey and RTL wrappers for it. So the Objective-C bridge is found in the Mac API Objective-C, but then we also have the Objective-C runtime and the iOS API helpers unit. So those three units there give you access to most stuff you're going to need for interacting with other native APIs from iOS. All the additional iOS APIs are in the source RTL iOS folder. There's a lot less than there was with Android. I don't remember the exact number, but just that they're the way Apple partitions things. There's a lot more in each individual. There is a utility available called SDK Transform. It's a command line utility that generates Object Pascal header files for iOS and Mac OS frameworks. There's not a lot of documentation available for it, but there is a page, a blog post on FMX Express on SDK Transform that points to a utility developed by one of our Japanese MVPs that makes it really easy to work with SDK Transform. So SDK Transform is a command line utility, but with this GUI you can download from that link there, it makes it really easy, so you don't have to remember all the command line options. You just fill out the user interface, click the button, and it does the work for you. Now, if your intention is to import some additional iOS frameworks that are built into the part of the iOS framework, well, once again, FMX Framework has a collection of those out on GitHub. You can go out there and grab the ones you're looking for and not have to go through the process of importing those individually. If you're wanting to import third-party ones, though, then definitely you want to check out the SDK Transform utility. A couple resources for you. We have 2 skill sprints down there. The Using Touch ID skill sprint was done by Olaf Monin, and he shows how to use Touch ID. He doesn't go through the process of importing the framework because someone else has already done that and put it up on GitHub. You'd be surprised how many of those are out there. Different people have done quite a bit. And so you can go check. That's what he uses, but he goes through the process of how to make the call. And Touch ID is pretty cool technology, so it might be worth watching that just for the Touch ID implementation he shares. Previously, before that, we had Jacob Thurman did a presentation, a skill sprint on Objective-C calls from Delphi. Very, very in depth there. That was prior to the SDK Transform. So he walks through how to build that wrapper manually. So luckily the SDK Transform will take care of that for you, but explains a lot of the differences between Objective-C and Delphi and why things work the way they do. So very cool to check that one out as well. With that, it's time for Q&A. If you're here for the live session, you can put your question into the question panel and we'll do our best to get them answered. If not, we can possibly follow up with you via email later. So if you do have questions, you can also feel free to email me, jim.mckeith@embarcadero.com. And there is the link for the replay and slides and additional resources. Okay, there's been a lot of questions as we're going along here. I've been doing my best to get them answered for you. Apparently the t-shirt I was showing during the webcam, Ross said he has it as well. It was the red t-shirt that says RAD Studio on it. It's one of my favorites. Actually, I have a few of them. Red's my favorite color, by the way, so that's probably why. Okay, Yusuf, you're asking about how to have your app start after the device boots. Actually, I was going to show that today, but I thought it might be a little too specific. But I have some code here so I can find it. You can do it. There it is right there. I found Danny Nguyen did a blog post about it. I actually follow. If you can't get that one to work, there's another one that's in Russian that I followed and got to work just fine. So it's possible to do. It just requires a couple steps because you have to. Yeah, a couple steps, but it explains it in there. Take a look at that. If you prefer Russian, let me know, Yusuf, and I'll send you the Russian link if I can remember where I got it from. Is it possible to apply transition effect in iOS using forms instead of tabs? I've not tried it with forms, but you could do it with frames and embed the frames in the tabs. I'd have to experiment with it. Let's see if you can, because if you can add effect, so you could do a visibility. That would be easy enough to do. I'm not seeing it. I have to play with that some more. But what I know will work is you can put a frame on or do it with frames. So you can do it with frames. It'd probably be the easiest way, or that's what I've done before, and it works just fine. Is there a difference between importing Objective-C libraries and Swift libraries? If so, how is Embarcadero handling the migration to Swift third-party SDKs? I would expect there's no difference because Swift is compatible with the Objective-C. So I would expect there's no difference at all.
originally Apple said everything on iOS and Mac OS is Objective-C. If you want to talk to us, you need to talk to Objective-C. And we're like, okay, fine, we'll talk to Objective-C. And they're like, oh, well, we changed our language to Swift, but the language they're compiling to is Swift. Or the language they're compiling from is Swift, but the target is still the same. The intermediary layer is still the same. So we're actually not talking to Objective-C. We're talking to the intermediary layer, the DLLs, if you will, the libraries. So the libraries are still the same. It's just the language you use to get there. So it's like, so I don't think it's going to matter. I've not heard anything about it mattering about that. So it should be fine. If not, then we'll figure out a way to fix that. Is the iOS bridge code generated the command line tool appropriate for C++ or Pascal only? So it is Pascal. The code it generates is Pascal. That being said, you can C++ Builder can work with Objective-C right in the IDE. The Objective-C compiler, so the C++ compiler can compile C, C++, Objective-C, or Pascal. So even though the code that is generated by the header translator is Pascal to wrap it in the Delphi types and stuff like that, you can then compile that Pascal code with the C compiler. We had a skills webinar last week on doing more with C++ by David Millington. You can go to community.embarcadero.com and find the replay for that. And he showed how to consume Pascal code from Objective-C or from C++ Builder. It's really straightforward. It's just like I said, it's built into the compiler. After storing data locally on my mobile device, how can I get the data back into my PC? Tomorrow we're going to do some things around talking to remote servers, so tune in tomorrow. We're not going to what we're showing tomorrow should cover that. So there's a question about nested layouts. I just did some tests here. If you have a layout with a layout on it and then some controls in that child layout, if you change the visibility of the parent layout so if everything starts visible and you change the parent layout into visible false, then everything disappears. But then if you change the parent layout back to visible again, then everything reappears. But if you change the visibility of one of the children to false and then change the parent to true or false, that doesn't change the visibility property of the children. Okay, so in order for a child to be visible, its visibility has to be true and its parent has to be visible. If you want to move tab positions, if you just change the index of the tab, I just did some experiments with that and it seems to be working great. Each tab has an index property, and you'd say tab item 1 dot index equals 2, and tab item 2 dot index equals 0, for example, and it switches them around. There's some questions about whether or not you should use tabs or frames or forms in iOS. I've always used tabs in frames. I think it's a little more flexible, and in my mind at least, I feel like it has a little less overhead, but probably not any big difference as far as performance goes. The biggest difference between tabs and forms is with tabs, all your code's in the same unit, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. If it's of any complexity at all, then you definitely want to have your code split out into multiple units. Now you can split out into multiple units by putting it in frames and then putting the frames in tabs, or you can so there's a question about transitions. Let's see where I can find that. I lost my spot here. There we go. I was able to paste it into the chat window there. That link there is for the transitions. Or if you just Google Delphi skill sprint transitions, you can find it. And then there I show how to, I have 2 panels and I do transition effects between the panels. It's really cool actually, because I actually have like an animation indicator on one of the panels, and you can see the animation is in effect while the transition is taking effect, and during the transition you can still click on the buttons and type in the text box and stuff like that. So very, very powerful. So that would be one advantage, is if you have everything on the same form, then you can transition between different layouts, for example, or different frames in the same form. I don't know if you can transition between different forms, and so that would be an advantage of doing frames and tabs over forms, is to be able to transition between the two. So interestingly, you can use a frame like a form, or a form like a frame. You can take a form and embed it in a layout or a tab control. So you could do multiple forms and then embed those forms in there, although at that point you really might as well be using frames. It's just a matter of which one you want to do. Yeah, hopefully we'll get yesterday's replay posted today, but just hasn't been posted yet. Are there plans for Code Rage year? I quite like these tutorials. Yes, we are planning to do Code Rage this year. We usually do it around fall time frame, so probably be around fall this year. I love Code Rage. It's a ton of work, but I really enjoy them. I love putting them together, and I love seeing all the stuff that happens. Unfortunately, I'm too busy running Code Rage to actually watch all the sessions during Code Rage, but I try and watch them afterwards. Anyway. An example, accessing the user's login IDs, calendars, SMS, email storage, Dropbox, and other sources that the device has access to through being logged into the device. I'm not thinking of using TMS tools. So you can access all those APIs, Pat, through the platform APIs. I'm not sure which device you're looking at, but you can. We have a new component for accessing contacts on the device, so you can look into the code for that and see how it's done. One note. So one of the things that how this is put together is you have a if you add the excuse me, contacts. Let's see. Okay, take a look at the contact sample, and if you go if you want to look in the platform-specific implementations, there will be a unit that's FMX dot something, and I can't remember what it is offhand. But if you go into that unit and then go down to the implementation section, in the implementation section, you'll see uses, and you'll see some compiler conditional defines in the uses section in the implementation area. And then there it'll have one that's Android, there the one that's iOS. So you can go into the one for Android or iOS and see how it works. And so if you take a look at that, then you should be able to get some ideas. Also, really you just got to look into the APIs provided by the platform and how to, and then just access those using the tools I showed you. For example, the Java 2 OP or the SDK transform, or you can go and grab those from GitHub. So yeah, you can totally get there, but I don't have any examples of that offhand. Although if you Google, you might be able to find some online. I just have not done that. So there's a comment about getting an error message using the camera. You have to make sure, and I pointed this out in there, that you're using the T-thread synchronize, because from the event on the camera component you can't access the UI because it's coming in on a different thread. So you use T-thread synchronized in order to put it back onto the UI thread, and then it will work correctly. And then also, yeah, I didn't have my camera in my shared my virtual machine. That's why it didn't work. Yeah, if you get the can't activate current context, then you're using it in the wrong thread. Okay, so there was a lot of questions. Hopefully I've got all of them answered. If not, certainly feel free to send me an email. I'll try and get your emails. I'm still trying to catch up from putting all this together, but if not, I will certainly try and respond. The replay will be posted in the near future at the URL I posted there, which is embt.co/RAD Mobile Boot Camp 2017 with Pascal case, right? So it starts with the capital letter and then all the letters. RAD is capitalized, and Mobile Boot Camp each have the first letter capitalized. So, okay. Well, thank you so much. Where can we find platform-specific code samples? So there's none of, we don't ship any platform-specific code samples, but like I said, if you look into the way FireMonkey is implemented on each platform, you can certainly find some code there. There's lots of code there. That's a good way to get started. You can also do some Googling, and we have a lot of MVPs all around the world that are covering lots of great features in there. And I'll be honest, oftentimes if I want to figure out how to do something, I end up reading an MVP's blog because they've already figured it out. The Delphi Cookbook by Danielle Tete, I pointed out, has also got some platform-specific things in there, like it said it has Java 2 OP in it. So depending on what you're wanting to do, there's lots of samples out there. But like, for example, the Danny Wind one I just shared in an earlier question was how to have an Android app that starts on boot, and that's platform-specific to Android. iOS does not have the concept of being able to do that. So there's lots of platform-specific samples out there for different things, and it's just a matter of what you want to do and how you want to get there. How to make a service in iOS. There is no services in iOS. Well, so you can set your app up to say, I want my app to be able to run in the background mode, and then once your app starts, once the user launches your app, then your app can stay in the background. And that's a matter of you have to go to the web developer console and set something up for your app ID provisioning so that your app has permission to do that, and then you have to set something in your plist or info.plist file. Apple has it all in their documentation, so you have to look at Apple's documentations and follow through those steps there. Once you've done that, then your app can stay in the background until it gets pushed out. On Android, you have the ability to have your app launch automatically in the background on boot. So that's different on Android. You can't do that on iOS as far as I know. But if you take a look at Apple's documentation, then you can certainly do that. All right, so one more question here I see. Comparison of Xamarin and FireMonkey Delphi, what is easier, what is better? I'm not sure I understand what that means. So I can tell you, I've used Xamarin in the past. Actually, at one point I interviewed with Xamarin to be a evangelist for them, so I consider myself fairly knowledgeable about it. Xamarin, what it does is it is just a, well, basically what Xamarin is, it lets you use C# to develop Android and iOS apps, but you're still calling all of the Android and iOS APIs directly. They've since added Xamarin Forms and a few other very light abstractions that let you reduce the amount of code you have to replicate, because it used to be originally you had to write your entire app for Android and your entire app for iOS, but they're both written in C#. So your business logic type code could be shared between the two, but as far as your code that draws forms and accesses cameras and stuff like that and databases was all specific to each platform. They've since added some more abstractions that help with that a little bit, but you still end up at the end of the day have two different projects, one project for Android, one project for iOS, and they share some code. And you're also writing, most of the stuff you're doing is going to be accessing those APIs directly. So in that sense, Xamarin's a little lower level, if you will, than Delphi, which means you're accessing more APIs on Xamarin, which could be a positive, than you are on Delphi. But that being said, on Delphi, there are some third parties that have created purely native component sets for Android and iOS that you can use and build an entirely native UI for Android, entirely native UI for iOS, and using the stuff I showed you, you can access all the APIs. So you can have the Xamarin experience with Delphi. But what Delphi adds on top of that is this really nice high-level abstraction with FireMonkey and the RTL, where you don't have to think about, am I on iOS or Android? For the most part, it just works. And I hate using that phrase, it just works, because there's always little idiosyncrasies, you have to think about, because, like, for example, iOS has some design specs that say your tabs should be at the bottom, whereas Android says they should be at the top, for example. But for the most part, you can be fairly agnostic about what platform you're on. Like, for example, using the camera component, the database component. If you go to Xamarin's website and say, how do I access a database? They're like, okay, on Android, you do this. And they have, pages of stuff, and on iOS you do this, and they have pages of stuff. They said, or you can use this ADO thing that kind of works, but then you can do this on Android, this on iOS, and it's kind of a little, maybe they've updated it since the last time I looked, but you still end up doing have to do a lot of platform-specific behaviors. On Delphi and FireMonkey, I showed yesterday, it's the same. You just put down an FD component connection, set the properties, and boom, you're connected to the database, the local database, and accessing data, inserting and updating, deleting. You're writing don't have to write much code. You write code, but you don't have to. And so that's the difference. With Xamarin, it's a very light abstraction layer, very close to the platform APIs. Delphi, you can work at that layer if you want to, but you don't have to. And so that's the thing I like about Delphi. Like I mentioned, with same thing with VCL for Windows. You could access Windows handles and messages and all that stuff if you wanted to, but you didn't have to. So it's the same thing with FireMonkey. You can access all those platform APIs and components and stuff if you want to, but you don't have to. So in my opinion, Delphi is way better because it gives you more layers to work at, which makes you more productive, because if you can drop a couple components in the form and set some properties and be done and not have to write, a few pages of code that's specific to each platform, that's a huge productivity improvement. And also the other thing with that is that anytime you're maintaining projects that are different on each platform, you end up having this problem where you have leapfrogging releases, right? So you add a new feature and on iOS, and then you go to and you release it on iOS, and you go add the new feature on Android, and in the process you fix a bug on iOS. Now iOS has got features Android doesn't have, and then you release Android, and Android's got the bugs fixed already that you discovered in the iOS release. So now Android's ahead of iOS because it has bug fixes, and so you go back to fix iOS and add a new feature there, and so you end up going back and forth. And so if you're maintaining or supporting two different versions, then you end up having especially like a business enterprise use case or line of business type use case, you're going to have frustrated users and frustrated support. So that's my opinion. I definitely like Delphi better. Is there any way to tell the project that some files are specific to Android so that when you compile for the iOS, those ones are not included? Yes, you use compiler directives. There was a skill sprint we did on that. If you Google skill sprint Delphi compiler directives, effective use of if-def for cross-platform compilation or cross-platform development. Yes, so you can use that to say this code only compiles for iOS, this code only compiles for Android, this code only compiles for Windows. You can have compiler directives for like debug versus not debug, a whole bunch of different options. You can also use the deployment manager to only say some files are deployed for iOS as far as like graphical files or data files or something like that. So there's a whole lot of flexibility around there. So Michael, it answered your question, which is better, Xamarin or FireMonkey. Honestly, I like both, but I think FireMonkey is way more productive. And you can do, there's a few things you can do with Xamarin you can't do with FireMonkey, but they're really corner niche cases. But there's a few things you can do with, well, I guess you could eventually get there with Xamarin, but gosh, it'd be a lot of work. Delphi, you're just going to be so much more productive and so much more easy to maintain your application and support your users. Yes, with Delphi you get faster results. Yeah. That's the other thing. So Xamarin has three different, what's the term? Memory management on mobile. So on iOS, they use Arc. Arc, in my opinion, is way superior to garbage collection. And then on Android, they have two different garbage collectors you can choose from. And so what that means is if you're writing an application and on iOS and Android, it's going to behave differently. The memory management, the objects lifecycle is going to behave differently on those two platforms. So you cannot be completely agnostic to which platform you're on. You have to know that the things would be released and maintained differently. And so you're going to end up having, conditional defines in any shared code to deal with that. And I know that Delphi has a different memory management on mobile versus desktop, but yeah, it's like having, two different versions of Windows, in my opinion, really, that are behaving differently, and that would be frustrating to me. Okay, so Visual Studio Community costs nothing. So that is true, but if you want to use it in a professional setting, you have to buy a license. So the Community Edition is designed for free development. Now we have a free starter edition as well, which we're actually looking to rework, maybe we'll add some more functionality to. But if you're wanting to do professional development, you have to buy a Visual Studio license and buy a Xamarin license. So it's kind of a misleading with the whole free thing. I've actually gone out and looked at it and priced it, and you do end up needing to buy it, and it can end up being more expensive than Delphi is. So yeah, I will agree there are pros and cons. So it really depends what you're trying to do. I'm always hesitant to say which is better overall, because there are pros and cons. I personally like Delphi better, and like I said, I was at one point interviewing to be a Xamarin evangelist, and I like Xamarin because they were doing it mobile first, but I was like, it's such a pain that I have to do two separate ones, and so that was frustrating back then to me as well. Yep, free for one single developer or 5 programmers in small companies. So if you are small, then it is free. Okay, I think we're done. So thank you so much for joining us. And wow, it's top of the hour already. Time goes fast. I hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you learned a lot. I will work to get the replays available as soon as possible, which will probably be later this week. And so hopefully we'll see you online tomorrow. Craig Chapman will be joining me tomorrow. He was working on day 3, and he'll probably be doing most of the presentation tomorrow, but I'll be around as well. Thanks so much. Talk to you later.